Dad called me the family embarrassment at dinner until his boss recognized me and froze. My dad didn't even lower his voice when he said it, which is the part that made my skin go tight like I'd walked into cold water. He set his fork down with this deliberate little clink against the plate, leaned back in his chair like he was delivering a toast, and looked straight at me over the rim of his wine glass. Honestly, he said, smiling in that polite, corporate way that never reaches his eyes, she's the family embarrassment, but we keep her around anyway. Right, sweetheart? The table went quiet in that instant way it does when everyone hears something they weren't supposed to hear out loud. I could hear the restaurant around us, soft jazz, someone laughing too loudly at another table, the scrape of a chair across tile, and yet it felt like we were the only people in the room. My throat went dry. My hands, which had been folded in my lap to keep from fidgeting, clenched without me deciding to. Across from me, my mother's smile froze on her face like it had been glued there. Next to Dad, his boss lifted his gaze from the menu and looked at me properly for the first time all night. I didn't say anything at first because my brain did that stupid buffering thing it does when I'm shocked. Like it's trying to find the correct response from a list of acceptable options, and all of them taste wrong. I stared at the white tablecloth, at the little flicker of candlelight trapped in the glass votive, at the tiny smear of sauce on the edge of my plate, as if any of those details could anchor me. My cheeks were burning so hot, I felt like everyone could see the heat. My dad kept smiling, waiting for laughter, waiting for me to play along and make it easier for him. My brother made this small, choking noise like he'd swallowed a laugh and regretted it. And then Dad's boss, this tall man in a gray suit who'd been politely charming to my parents and politely dismissive to me, went very still. Not awkward still. Not, oh dear, that was rude still. His eyes narrowed like he was trying to match a face to a memory. He looked at my dad, then back at me, and his mouth parted slightly. The muscles at his jaw tightened, and for a split second, I watched him lose that smooth executive expression like a mask slipping. He stared at me as if I'd just walked in holding a fire alarm. Wait, he said slowly. You're Leah? And my dad's smile, mid-performance, faltered. It was a Thursday night dinner, the kind my dad loves because it lets him combine food with status. 2 days earlier he'd called and said, we're celebrating something important. Or something nice. He didn't say what. He didn't say who would be there. He just said it like an instruction, which is basically how he's always spoken to me when he wants something. I'd almost said no. I was tired, and not just physically, tired in the way you get when you know you're walking into a room where you'll have to be careful with every expression on your face, so no one can accuse you of making it weird. But my mom sounded hopeful when she texted, please come. It would mean a lot. Just one dinner. No drama. And I hate that line because it always implies the drama is something I carry around like glitter, not something they pour on me and then complain I'm shiny. My dad and I have been in this loop for years. He's proud of himself and embarrassed of me, sometimes in the same sentence. When I was a kid, he'd brag about my grades, but roll his eyes if I talked too much. In high school, he'd show off my scholarships to his friends, but tell me not to act like I'm better than people. In college, when I didn't pick the career he wanted, something in him calcified. I didn't go pre-law like he pushed. I didn't go into finance like he's in. I went into computer science because I liked it and because for the first time, there was a thing I was good at that didn't require me to make myself smaller for someone else's comfort. My dad called it playing on computers. He'd say it with a laugh at family events like he was being lighthearted, but the message was clear. It wasn't real. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't something he could use. Then, after graduation, I moved out, got a job, built a life that didn't revolve around his approval. And still, he'd find ways to drag me back into being the punchline. He'd tell relatives I didn't like people, like that's why I didn't visit. He'd tell my grandparents I was confused about what I want, like my career was a phase. He'd introduce me as my daughter. She's in tech, I guess, like I'd join a cult. If I corrected him, he'd sigh and say, see, this is why I can't take you anywhere. So when he asked me to come to dinner, I already knew the shape of the night. I'd show up, smile, ask polite questions, pretend his little digs didn't land, and leave with that familiar hollow feeling like I'd been held underwater and told to be grateful for the swim. The restaurant was one of those places where the lighting is dim enough to make everyone look softer, where the menus have no prices, where the servers glide instead of walk. My dad was in a suit, even though it wasn't necessary, and my mom had on the pearl earrings she saves for important events. My brother, Aaron, looked uncomfortable in his collared shirt like he dressed up for court. When we arrived, Dad's boss stood up immediately to shake hands, all charm and teeth. "David," he said warmly to my dad, "congratulations again." My dad's chest puffed slightly. That should have been my first clue. A promotion, some kind of recognition, something Dad wanted to bask in. He introduced my mom like a trophy. "This is my wife, Claire," he said, and then he looked at me like he'd forgotten I existed. "And this is Leah." No last name. No context. No, she works in. Nothing. Just Leah, like a loose object he didn't want attached to him. His boss was polite to me in that way people are polite when they don't expect to ever see you again. "Nice to meet you," he said, and then he turned back to my dad to ask about quarterly targets like I wasn't sitting there. I tried anyway. I asked about the food. I asked my mom if she liked her drink. I asked Aaron about his new apartment. Dad spoke over me every time, steering conversation back to himself, to work, to his stress, to his responsibilities. I watched him do it with the same tight familiarity you watch someone pick a scab they swear isn't there. And then, halfway through the meal, after the appetizer plates were cleared and Dad's boss had ordered another bottle of wine, Dad decided to use me. I should have seen it coming. The story about kids these days. The joke about nobody wants to work. The little sideways glance at me, like I was a prop. He said it with that smile. "She's the family embarrassment." I sat there as the words settled into the tablecloth. My mom's lips parted, but she didn't say anything. Aaron stared at his plate, jaw clenched. I could feel the pulse in my ears, loud enough to make everything else seem distant. My dad's boss looked at me, and in that moment I didn't see judgment exactly. I saw confusion. Like he couldn't reconcile the insult with whatever he was seeing in my face. And then the confusion sharpened. "Wait," he said again, setting his glass down slowly. Leah Yates." I blinked. Hearing my last name in that space from a stranger hit me oddly hard. "Yeah," I said, voice too quiet. "Leah Yates." His eyes widened a fraction. He stopped himself, glanced around like he suddenly remembered he was in public, then looked back at me with a different intensity. "From the incident last month. The security incident." The candlelight caught the side of my dad's face as he turned. The color there drained so fast, it was almost comical if it hadn't been my life. "What?" my dad said too quick. His boss didn't answer him immediately. He was still looking at me. "You were the one who led the response," he said, almost like he couldn't believe it. "You're the lead who walked our team through the containment plan. You were on the call at 2 in the morning. You kept everyone calm. You." He shook his head once, stunned. "David, do you know who this is?" My dad's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at me like I'd suddenly become a stranger at my own table. My stomach flipped because I understood it now. He didn't know. He genuinely didn't know. Not because I'd hidden it, but because he'd never cared enough to listen long enough for the details to stick. I forced my hands to relax on my lap. "I work in security," I said, the words tasting strange in my mouth in front of my parents. "I'm a response lead at—" I named the company. My dad's boss let out a low breath. "At our vendor," he said, voice sharp with disbelief. "The one who saved us from a catastrophic breach." He turned back to my dad. "David, she's the reason we didn't end up in the news for the wrong reasons. She's the reason we weren't explaining to the board why customer data was exposed." The word board landed like a gavel. My dad didn't move. He just stared at his boss, then at me, like he was watching his own reality rearrange itself. He began, and for the first time all night, he sounded unsure. "I didn't realize." "No," his boss said, and it wasn't angry exactly, but it had an edge. "You clearly didn't." The table went silent again, but it was a different silence now. Before, it had been the kind that collapses around the person being humiliated. Now it had shifted, and the spotlight was on my dad. on the fact that he'd called me an embarrassment in front of someone who apparently owed me gratitude. My mom blinked rapidly, like she was trying to keep tears from spilling. She kept looking at me as if she was seeing me for the first time in years. Aaron's head lifted slightly, and I saw a flicker of something in his face. Relief, maybe, or vindication. Dad's boss turned to me again, voice gentler. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. I didn't connect it. Honestly, you were a lifesaver." He paused, then added, quieter, "and you don't deserve that." I didn't know what to do with that sentence. My throat tightened so hard it almost hurt. My dad laughed then, too loud and too forced, like he was trying to shove the moment back into a joke he could control. "Well, he said, waving a hand, "I was just teasing. She knows I'm proud." I looked at him, really looked. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. His smile was fixed and desperate. His boss didn't laugh. He didn't play along. He just watched my dad with a calm expression that somehow felt worse than anger. "David," he said, "that didn't sound like pride." My dad's face flushed, and for a second I saw the irritation rise. His instinct to regain power by turning the discomfort outward. "It's family banter," he snapped quickly. "You wouldn't understand." His boss leaned back slightly, still calm. "I understand professionalism," he said, "and I understand how you speak about people when you think it benefits you." My dad froze, fully froze, like his body had locked up around the realization that his boss wasn't going to let him wriggle out of it. The rest of the dinner moved like a dream you can't wake up from. Servers came and went. Plates arrived. Wine was poured. My dad's boss shifted conversation back to safer topics, but he kept including me now, asking about my work, asking how long I'd been in the field, asking about the stress of incident response like he was trying to undo the damage in real time. I answered politely, but my hands were still trembling under the table, and every time I spoke I felt like I was balancing on a thin wire between wanting to cry and wanting to laugh and wanting to leave. At one point, my dad excused himself to go to the bathroom, and the second he was out of earshot, my mom leaned across the table toward me, eyes shining. "Why didn't you tell us?" she whispered. "Istir de her." "I did," I said. "Not cruelly. Just honestly. I've told you both. More than once." Her face crumpled a little, like the truth was painful and inconvenient. "Your father, he doesn't always. He doesn't listen." I finished because she couldn't say it. My mom swallowed, and her voice shook. "I'm proud of you," she said. I wanted to believe her. I did, but pride after public validation feels different. It feels like arriving late to something you should have been there for from the beginning. When my dad came back, his posture was stiff. He sat down and avoided looking at me. He avoided looking at his boss. He talked too much, too fast, like he was trying to outrun the shame. And his boss watched him the way you watch someone reveal something about themselves you can't unsee. When dinner finally ended, Dad's boss stood up and shook my hand again. This time it wasn't perfunctory. He held on for a second longer, eyes steady. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Truly. Of course," I managed. Then he turned to my dad. "David," he said, and his voice went very professional, "I'll see you Monday. We should talk." My dad's face tightened. "About what?" His boss smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "About a few things," he said, and then he walked away. The air he left behind felt colder. In the parking lot, my dad rounded on me before we even reached our cars. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, low and furious. My mom flinched beside him like she'd anticipated the explosion. Aaron immediately found something fascinating in his phone screen. I blinked at my dad, genuinely stunned by the nerve. "What was what?" I asked. "You let him talk to me like that," my dad said, voice rising. "You sat there and—" he gestured vaguely, like I'd orchestrated his humiliation. "You embarrassed me." For a second, I didn't even have words. Then I felt something in my chest shift, something solid, something that had been forming quietly for years. "I didn't embarrass you," I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady. "You embarrassed yourself." My dad's face went red. "Don't take that tone with me." "What tone?" I asked, and I could hear my own heartbeat, but I didn't back away. The tone where I don't pretend you didn't just call me an embarrassment in front of strangers. The tone where I don't laugh it off to make you comfortable. My dad stepped closer, and for a split second the old fear tried to rise. Old memories of him towering, of me shrinking, of my mom saying stop provoking him. But I didn't move. You think you're so high and mighty because some guy in a suit recognized you, he spat. Don't forget who raised you. My mom made a small sound. David. He ignored her. I looked at him, at the tight jaw, at the anger, at the way his pride was more important to him than my dignity, and I felt tired. Not the tired of a long day, the tired of a long pattern. You didn't raise me, I said quietly. You managed me. You corrected me. You used me when it made you look good and mocked me when it didn't. My dad's mouth opened. His face twitched like he was searching for a comeback that would restore him. You're being dramatic, he snapped. Sure, I said, and I surprised myself by smiling a little. Not happy, just resigned. That's what you always say when I stop being convenient. Aaron finally looked up then. He cleared his throat, voice awkward. Dad, you kind of started it. My dad swung toward him. Stay out of it. Aaron's face tightened. No, he said, and his voice was small but firm. You've been doing this forever. It's not funny. It's just mean. My dad stared at him like he'd betrayed a secret code. My mom's eyes filled again, and she whispered, Please, can we just go home? My dad turned back to me, and his voice dropped, dangerous and controlled. You cost me tonight, he said. You don't understand what you've done. I felt the words hit and slide off, because something fundamental had changed. He could threaten me with his disappointment all he wanted. I'd already lived with it my whole life. I understand exactly what I did, I said. I sat there and didn't save you from yourself. Then I opened my car door. My dad's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to remind me he still thought he could physically stop me. The contact made my skin crawl. I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. Let go, I said. His eyes flashed. Don't walk away from me. I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay even. Let go, I repeated. Or I'm going to make this a scene in the parking lot of the restaurant where your boss just thanked me. Something in his face flickered. Calculation. Image. The thing he worships. He released me like I burned. I got in my car, shut the door, and just sat there for a second with my hands on the steering wheel, shaking so hard the keys rattled in the ignition. Through the windshield, I saw my mom standing by my dad, one hand on his arm, trying to soothe him like he was the child. I saw Aaron hovering in that helpless middle space. And I saw my dad staring at my car with an expression that wasn't regret. It was fury that the script had changed and he hadn't approved the rewrite. I drove home on autopilot, streetlights smearing across the windshield like pale paint. When I got to my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and stood in my kitchen staring at nothing. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. Are you home? Please don't hate us. I'm proud of you. I read it 3 times. My throat burned. I didn't answer. Monday morning, my dad called me at 7:12 a.m., which is not normal. He usually doesn't call unless he needs something. I let it ring out. He left a voicemail, and the tone was different, too calm, too careful. Leah, he said, we need to talk. Call me. An hour later, my mom texted, your dad had a meeting. He's upset. Please be kind. That's when I knew that we should talk from his boss wasn't a casual chat. Later that day, Aaron called me. He sounded rattled. Dad got pulled into HR, he said. Not like fired, but like questioned. His boss asked him why he talks about you like that. And Dad lied, of course. He said you're unstable and you take things personally. I felt my stomach drop, but not out of surprise. Out of disgust. Of course he did, I said. Aaron exhaled, but it didn't work. His boss. I don't know, he looked done. Like he'd seen something he can't unsee. I sat on my couch, staring at my hands. Part of me wanted justice. Part of me wanted my dad to finally feel what it's like to be diminished in a room where it matters. And part of me, this softer, annoying part, felt sad. Because as much as I'm angry, he's still my dad. And I hate that my heart insists on caring about someone who treats it like a tool. That night, my dad showed up at my apartment without warning. I opened the door, and there he was, standing too straight, eyes too sharp, like he'd rehearsed what he was going to say and still couldn't control the emotion leaking out. "I lost a lot of respect today," he said immediately. I blinked. "You lost respect?" I repeated. He walked in without being invited, looked around like my space offended him, then turned back to me. "You made me look like a fool," he said, "in front of my boss." I laughed once, quietly, because it was either that or cry. "Dad," I said, "you called me an embarrassment." He waved a hand like that was a footnote. "It was a joke." "It wasn't," I said. My voice was steady again, and I didn't know where that steadiness kept coming from, but I clung to it. "And even if you meant it as a joke, normal fathers don't joke about their daughters being embarrassing like that." His nostrils flared. "You don't know what it's like, Leah," he said, voice rising. "I've worked my whole life. I've sacrificed. And I've spent my whole life trying not to inconvenience you." I cut in, and my own voice sharpened. "Do you know what it's like to sit at a table and wait for your parent to decide if you're worth defending? Do you know what it's like to hear your own father call you an embarrassment and watch everyone smile through it?" My dad's jaw clenched. "You're too sensitive." There it was. The classic. The sentence that makes cruelty sound like a personality flaw in the person being hurt. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I said something I didn't know I'd ever be able to say out loud. "I'm not sensitive," I said. "You're careless. And you've been careless with me for years because you assumed I'd always absorb it." My dad stared at me like I'd slapped him. "I'm done absorbing it," I added quieter. His face tightened, and for a second I thought he might soften. But then his pride surged back in like a wave. "So what?" he said bitterly. "Now you're going to cut me off? Punish me?" I felt that old guilt twitch, the urge to reassure him, to smooth things over, to make it okay. And then I thought about the way his boss had looked at me, the way he'd thanked me, the way he'd said, "You don't deserve that," like it was obvious. I thought about how a stranger had defended me more cleanly than my own father ever had. "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm protecting myself." My dad swallowed. His throat bobbed. He looked past me, toward my living room, toward the framed photo of me and Aaron as kids on a hiking trail, our faces sunburned and smiling, my dad behind the camera. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Loss, maybe, or fear. Then it hardened again. "You think you're better than this family," he muttered. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I think I deserve better than being your joke." He stared at me, lips pressed tight, and then he did the thing he always does when he can't control the narrative. He reached for a final insult. "Don't be surprised when people stop inviting you," he said coldly. I held his gaze. "I've been lonely in this family my whole life," I said. "At least now it'll be honest." The words hung between us like smoke. My dad's shoulders dropped a fraction, and for the first time he looked tired instead of angry. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "Fine," like he was granting me permission to be hurt. Then he turned and walked out, shutting my door a little too hard. I stood there in the quiet, heart pounding, and realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. The next week was weird. My mom called me twice and cried both times. Aaron texted me updates like he was reporting weather. Dad was sulking, Dad was angry, Dad was pretending nothing happened. My dad didn't call again. Not to apologize, not to explain, just silence, which, in my family, is another form of punishment. And I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt. It did. It still does. There's this ache that comes from finally standing up for yourself and realizing the people who should have loved you through it only loved you when you were compliant. But something else happened too, something I didn't expect. I stopped replaying the dinner in my head as a scene where I was humiliated, because that's not what it was anymore. It was the moment the room shifted, the moment my dad's cruelty didn't get the laugh track, the moment someone with power looked at me and saw competence, not inconvenience. The moment my dad realized he couldn't control who I was outside his house. I keep thinking about his boss's face, that exact second where he recognized me and froze. Not because it was satisfying to see my dad embarrassed, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a sharp little spark of vindication, but because it proved something that my dad spent years trying to convince me wasn't true. I'm not what he says I am. His words aren't a verdict. They're a reflection of him. A few days ago, my mom texted me a photo from the restaurant that night. Someone had taken early on, before everything blew up, our table lit by candlelight, my dad smiling, my mom posing, Aaron half laughing, me sitting there with my hands folded, looking small. My mom wrote, "I'm sorry. I didn't stop him. I should have." I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I zoomed in on my own face. I looked tired, guarded, like I was bracing for impact. And I felt this strange tenderness for that version of me, the one who kept showing up hoping tonight might be different. I texted my mom back, "I'm not coming to dinners like that anymore." She replied, "I understand. I don't know what happens next with my dad." Part of me wants an apology so badly it feels embarrassing to admit. Part of me knows he might never give one because it would require him to admit he was wrong, and pride is his favorite religion. Maybe we'll eventually have some shallow, polite relationship where we talk about weather and pretend the deeper stuff isn't there. Maybe we won't. But I do know this. When he called me the family embarrassment, he expected me to shrink. He expected me to laugh along and swallow it, and keep the peace so he could look good. Instead, for once, the truth showed up at the table before he could rewrite it. And he froze.